And it's 6 o'clock. A very good evening. We're coming to you live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to the second hour of The Full View. I'm Fundo Mabalani.
My name is Bonke Wazwani. Let's take you live to Swartkops Air Force Base in Centurion, where the handover of the remains of the 14 soldiers who died in the DRC is about to take place.
All right, we're live from the Swartkops Air Force Base here in Centurion for the official handover of the remains of the 14 South African soldiers that died in the volatile east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. You can see these live visuals on your screen now of the families that arrived just a little bit earlier on this afternoon, heading towards the tent where they will sit and receive the remains of their loved ones. It's been an agonizing wait for these families since news broke of the killing in volatile conditions in the conflict in the DRC. Today, some sort of closure for these families. These families, of course, will be joined by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is on his way to this official handover ceremony. I'm not alone, but I'm also joined by SABC News International reporter Kaelihle Khumalo, who's been here throughout the day. And Kaelihle, this is certainly a culmination of a moment of high emotions for this family, given that what they've been calling for was for the return of the remains of their loved ones.
Well, absolutely, Criselda. They pleaded with authorities, especially under very precarious conditions in the eastern parts of Congo, with the United Nations playing a very vital role in terms of facilitating the moving from Goma to Sake to Rwanda and heading all the way to Entebbe, and obviously with all the procedures that are quite necessary in terms of the pathology procedures, but also complying with all the procedures and the rules and the regulations governing the repatriation process. A fairly quite extensive process, Criselda, because I mean we're talking about 14 bodies here, but also their counterparts as well. 2 from Tanzania as well as 2 from Malawi, really just showing the solidarity that these soldiers, they were not just fighting by themselves, but also, Criselda, they were with their counterparts from Malawi, from Tanzania, but also part of MONUSCO. We know that MONUSCO, the United Nations mission, has been in the DRC, Criselda, for some time, but seemingly the situation not really changing quite drastically.
Yes, since in fact 1994, since the dawn of democracy in South Africa, we've seen South Africa move towards, being a true contributing country, in particular to areas where there've been instability and there's been no peace in certain areas. I mean, I did mention a bit earlier on Kaya, while the focus may be much on the Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of what had transpired there in January, the demise of these South African soldiers. South Africa has been involved in a number of peacekeeping missions in Eritrea, Ethiopia, as well as Burundi in Sudan. So South Africa is playing a pivotal role in ensuring there are areas on the continent in need of this peace and stability. It's been, in fact, in 2023, I know that South Africa had been the 5th largest contributing country of troops to the DRC, and the situation there certainly does remain volatile, moving these soldiers from the area where they had come under attack. And in this instance, what we also know is that where they are still stationed, the area where they are, the M23, are in charge of the area just right outside of where they are at this point. But this evening, it is going to be incredibly emotional. The vehicles that you will see behind me are the hearses that carry the remains of these fallen soldiers. They arrived a little bit earlier on this afternoon, and what we understand is that this afternoon, it was for the very first time, Kaya, that you had these families identifying the remains of their loved ones. That on its own tells us that this is the moment that they've been waiting for some kind of closure it's going to be incredibly difficult this evening, Kaya.
Well, absolutely, Criselda, especially because we know that the situation in Goma really was quite tense, quite unpredictable, and also the conditions were fairly harsh. I mean, it's a raging conflict, and in fact, to quote the SANDF in their statement on numerous occasions, they said it was a fierce battle. And we know that it's a very challenging place because it's a proliferation of these militia groupings. You have M23, you have Codeco, you have so many of them, Criselda. But also at the heart of this, it's a mineral-rich part of the DRC. And obviously, there are a lot of forces at play. But this is a place that has been plagued by the conflict for the longest time. And South Africa says our soldiers are there purely because it really bears testament to our commitment to make sure that if you talk about development in the African continent, if you talk about rolling out the African continental free trade area, we need a DRC that is free of conflict. We need a Mozambique that is free of insurgency, or any country for that matter in sub-Saharan Africa, Criselda.
Yeah, and absolutely, Kaya. If we also look at what the President had indicated just to Parliament this afternoon, indicating that, it is quite a mammoth task given to take the decision to have our troops deployed to these countries, but they're very cognizant of the conditions under which they deployed to these nations. For example, if we look at officially the deployment of the SANDF to on the SADC mission, that is, of course, since 2023 officially. But if we look at MONUSCO, which is the UN stabilization mission, this deployment has been since 1999. But way before that, we had seen the presence of the SANDF in some of these countries where there's conflict that continues to rage. And you're absolutely correct, Kaya. I think Africa itself cannot thrive without a peaceful Africa, a peaceful continent. And what we saw in the run-up to this repatriation process that was marred by some delays. We also saw heads of state, SADC, as well as the East Africa community, also come together. You'd recall in Tanzania, this was just this past weekend, and President Cyril Ramaphosa had been part of that. And what we heard him tell Parliament this afternoon was that the M23, if there's any to be a lasting solution of the raging conflict in the east of the DRC, it has to include the M23. And these are bold statements that are being made, which seems to suggest, in fact, the President did speak about inclusivity, which means no one can be left out if we're to find a lasting solution to the crisis that has been raging on in that country for quite some time. But of course, here this evening, proceedings were expecting to get underway any moment now. We do understand that the President of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, I think it comes with a lot of solace there, Kaya, that the Commander-in-Chief would be part of this all-important ceremony to thank these families for lending their sons, for lending their daughters in other missions as well to South Africa for the attainment of peace, not just in this country, but of course to lend that brotherly and sisterly hand to other countries on our continent that are not as peaceful.
Well, certainly, Criselda, we saw President Ramaphosa declaring those days of mourning, but also the flags flying at half-mast, describing these troops as gallant fighters, saying that they were there in the DRC in pursuit of peace, not for any interest whatsoever, but also really clarifying that it's quite a very important moment for the country to make sure that we rally behind these troops, show unwavering support, but also really just sort of removing and dispelling all those perceptions. Are they well equipped? Do they have the sufficient supplies? Because it's a very, very tough environment where they are, especially those who are still remaining. They are holed up in those bases. I think one of them is right by Goma Airport. And we know that one of the key demands that was made by the leaders of East Africa and the SADC region, they called for the reopening of the Goma Airport, Criselda, because we know that humanitarian aid is key for the civilians, those who are displaced, those who are just desperately looking for help. And also, it's a very important time as well for South Africa, really to show that its destiny really is inextricably linked with that of the African continent. If we talk about silencing the guns, I mean, certainly those hotspots, whether you're talking about the DRC, Criselda, the very, very volatile situation in Sudan. And we know that at some point, South African troops were in Darfur trying to deal with a very, very horrific situation where the crimes against humanity, the atrocities were committed.
Certainly, Kai, and we're expecting if you've just joined us here on SABC News, we're live from the Swartkops Air Force Base, and this is where the official ceremony will take place, the handover of the remains of these South African soldiers. All right, we're going to bring in now, and I'm going to hand over to Kai Kumale as well as Sophie Mokoena. In fact, I'll ask Sophie Mokoena to come in for us. And this is quite critical, Sophie, if you could just join us here. You've covered this story for many, many years. And I recall it was under your wing that we had also been deployed in 2017 to Goma. And we've had extensive coverage there. The conditions very much have not changed, even way before 2017. Take us back to how we've reached a point where just not South Africa only, but we saw when we spoke to our correspondent in Uganda, in Entebbe, that it was not just the bodies of the 14 South African soldiers, but 2 from Malawi, as well as 2 from Tanzania. So a number of nations are mourning.
You are correct, Criselda. The mission to the DRC has been a long commitment from South Africa. I think South Africans will remember that South Africa hosted the Congolese from different persuasions, and that included countries in the Great Lakes region like Uganda, the Rwanda, Burundi, because the problem here of the DRC, the neighboring countries also get affected, because when there's fighting from these different armed forces, at some point in time, there were 400 armed forces. So they will jump borders to go to neighboring countries. So to resolve the problem of the DRC, you have to bring in also neighboring countries so that there can be an understanding of what's happening. And therefore, after the Congolese dialogue in Sun City, an agreement was signed by President Paul Kagame then and the president of the DRC then, Joseph Kabila, where they agreed on a way forward to ensuring that there's total peace in the DRC. Now, that agreement is gathering dust. That is why we are where we are, because there was no implementation. And when you look at that document, it spells out what needs to be done in terms of integration of the armed forces, building of strong institutions that supports democracy, and also ensuring that you build the economy of the DRC with the help of other countries on the continent with capacity to do that. But also you then have the support of the UN forces to ensure that there's peace. Later on, when there were tensions, this MONUSCO, part of MONUSCO, was given powers to intervene, to fire, not only to stand between the warring factions. And it was called an intervention force. Now, they did manage to repel the M23 rebels. And then there were elections, and I remember the first term of President Tshisekedi. When he was campaigning, he came to South Africa, he granted SABC exclusive interview, he committed himself that he was going to ensure unity. And then later in Rwanda, working side by side with President Paul Kagame at the summit of Africa CEOs, committing to ensuring that DRC is friendly and it lives side by side with the neighboring countries, and there's peace. But later, it was not to be. And the M23 even made an announcement that they support him as the president. But after 18 months, there was no movement to integrate them in these structures, particularly in the armed forces. They retreated to battle. So that's where you saw this problem. Now, unfortunately, I think due to desperation, he then reached out to SADC to send troops. Now, there's an agreement in the region, in the SADC, that when member countries attacked, other countries must help. And that's why they sent the intervention force. On the other hand, you had EAC, because when it was nice, he decided to join EAC, which Kabila didn't like. He was more focused on the SADC. Then it got sour because he felt that EAC forces were real peacekeeping forces. They didn't want to intervene. They wanted to be between the warring factions. So that is why we are here. But talking about Goma, it's a beautiful region, rich in minerals, rich in natural resources, rich in tourism. And it's unfortunate that it's not stable. The project of Inga Dam that can electrify the entire continent can't proceed because of such tensions. And therefore, I think it remains to be seen. This time around, the president has emphasized that all armed forces or stakeholders must sit at the table and discuss, including the M23. So, and remember that document of Sun City had also indicated that the neighboring forces must withdraw. In other words, Rwanda must pull out of the eastern part because they were saying they are protecting their border because the genocidaires have crossed into Congo. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to ensure that you find a solution. But it's sad because the Great Lakes region is the richest region on the continent. It's the richest. The Great Lakes region can feed the entire continent in terms of food, including water, including electricity. But because there's also international interest, they are not at peace.
Do we see the latest meeting of, SADC leaders as well as the East Africa community that happened just over the weekend? President Cyril Ramaphosa also being part of that, in the room with the Rwandan President Paul Kagame. For the first time since we saw what had taken place, some spats regarding diplomatic spats, if I can put it that way. Do we see anything emerge, concrete from that, different to what we've heard in the past, that could yield positive results for lasting change in the east of the DRC?
It was unfortunate that there was that public spat from Rwanda, because in last year, during the commemoration of the genocide, President Ramaphosa has inherited a frosty relationship between South Africa and Rwanda. But he went there because he wanted also to engage with President Paul Kagame, and the President of South Africa, former Mbeki, also assisted. They met. They had a lengthy meeting before the commemoration of the genocide. And when I spoke to the president after the genocide, before he left for South Africa, he said the engagement were quite fruitful, and perhaps the interview SABC had with Paul Kagame assisted him to prepare. So there was better way of engagement. And there was an understanding that you can only achieve peace in that country through political solution. And of course, political solution demands inclusivity. But here we are, as I pointed out, that attack from the Congo forces directed at Rwanda and the South African base caught in a crossfire, and them having to defend themselves has heightened the tensions. But as I pointed out, you recall we've spoken to the M23. I asked them, why are you attacking South Africa? And they said, that was not our intention. We are not fighting with South Africa. And since then, behind the scenes, there have been talks. That's why you see the remains now. And there's that engagement now. Now, the president saying everybody must be on board. I think even the M23 will even soften its stance more in relation to South Africa. But also President Kagame will chill a bit, because he's pushing that the M23 must be invited. The same with President Museveni of Uganda. But we haven't had President Tshisekedi's side of a story in terms of the call now. President Ramaphosa saying President Tshisekedi must engage M23. But let's hope at the AU tomorrow, when the Peace and Security is meeting in Addis Ababa, the president is flying to Addis later today, we will hear more announcements in terms of way forward to find a solution to this protracted conflict in the DRC.
Well, let's bring it to tonight's official handing over of the remains of these 14 South African soldiers. President Cyril Ramaphosa, I heard in Parliament just before he left to come here, he's certainly not arrived at this particular point, but we do understand that he is en route. Very clear to say a lot has been said in the during the course or after the announcement of the killing of our soldiers. A lot's been said about, and it was clear to say this is nothing but a peace mission in that country.
Yes,
do you make anything of that, given that a lot has been said? I see there are some vehicles behind us. I'm sure our team will be able to show you. We're not quite sure at this particular stage who it is that might be arriving, but a number of dignitaries, some members, of course, of the President's executive are also expected to be here today. And we'll see in just a moment who that is. But Mam Sophie, you were talking to us a bit about the President, of course, indicating we're hoping that our camera would be able to just zoom in just a little bit there so we're able to see exactly who that is. But all right, Mam Sophie, you were talking about the President's sentiments in Parliament today.
The President sought to set the record straight because there are rumors that there's reinforcement, there's extra deployment. It's not true. I suspect there has been capacity building for evacuation in one of the neighboring countries, because that's what you do. Because our soldiers are confined in the base, and now the whole place has been taken over by M23. So there might be a withdrawal or pulling out as soon as countries have agreed on a way forward, and also on issues that are related to peace process.
In fact, Mam Sophie, we'll come back to you in just a second. We do understand from the announcements that are being made now that the chief of the SANDF, Rudzani Mapwanya, has just arrived here at the Air Force base. And of course, he's a pivotal part, as well as I understand some of the ministers as well, who have also arrived at the stage. We're also just trying to...
Yes, this is the leadership of the military, as you can see. And I think very soon we will also see the arrival of the president, because I can see one of the cars with the emblem of the presidency. So the president will soon be joining families, as it had been announced earlier on that on arrival, there where you have families, you have a seat where the president is going to sit next to Minister of Defense.
All right, if you've just joined us, thank you very much indeed, SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, the top brass of the military arriving, of the SANDF in fact, arriving at the Swartkorps Air Force Base. Those are pictures that we will see in just a moment. We're expecting them. All right. What we've just heard is the Chief of the SANDF, Rudzani Maphanya, of course now going to join the families, of course, for the first time today having identified the remains of their loved ones just hours before this official handover ceremony. Kaya?
Well, certainly, Criselda and Sophie, quite a very heart-wrenching moment. And in fact, we did see the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Angie Motshekga, just walking inside the marquee there. And really you can really see the emotions. I mean, she recently went to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in fact, we're just speaking to one of the officials in the department that the minister went to Goma, and the quite a number of advice saying, no, it's not ideal, it's quite volatile, but she went. In fact, she even went to the hospital to see the soldiers, some of the troops who were injured in this instance. So by all accounts, a very, very sad occasion where we see the culmination, where the families have been yearning for this moment. But of course, there you have it, the images there of the Commander-in-Chief, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, walking in there. In fact, as he walks in here, it's pouring, it's bucketing down, but quite a very important moment, Sophie and Criselda, just showing just the magnitude and the importance of this event.
And certainly the President, the Commander-in-Chief, as Sophie had indicated, joining the families of the loved ones, joining the families of the soldiers that of course, had perished in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Indeed, Kaya, I think this is an omen of some sort. It is bucketing, it is raining, and in African culture, as they say, the spirits of these fallen soldiers are with us here this evening. I see just behind me those hearses that are carrying the remains of the fallen soldiers are now moving back, and we do understand that they've been draped at the stage with the South African flag. Sophie?
Yes, now they will be taken as indicated earlier on. You actually spoke to, or it was Kaya, one official, that it will be 5 cars, and then 4 cars, taking those remains. And after the cars have left, then the family and the president will walk into one of the marquees. I'm sure our colleagues are in that marquee. They can show the visuals of the marquee where the president and others are going to join in a service, as you pointed out, with the chaplain leading those formalities. And now that moment of us seeing for the first time the coffins has arrived, and I think it's for the nation. I think this is a difficult time, because one thing that we've observed, we crisscross the country today speaking to South Africans. They are also in mourning, and they are supporting the families at this moment, at this difficult time. And we really appreciate the fact that some of those families were able to speak to us. You can see now the coffins will come out, Criselda.
All right, in just about a moment we'll pause while that happens. The remains of the 14 South African National Defence Force soldiers moving from Hangar 4. And this, of course, a moment that the loved ones have been waiting for, the official handover of the remains of the fallen South African. All right, we'll pause for this moment. All right, significant moment in this official send-off. The handover, of course, and those coffins have now made their way into these hearses right here behind me. And Kaya, I understand that they will drive off from here.
Well, very much so, Criselda. A very somber moment, and obviously now joining us now is, of course, a top man here from the SANDF, of course, Tanga. A very important moment here as we see this particular formation, where we see the SANDF members paying homage to their peers and colleagues. Tell us about this significance.
Thank you very much, Chris and the company. This is a very significant moment. It is a moment that we were waiting for, so that we can acute this ceremony, which we call a handing over ceremony, because we're handing over the mortal remains to the families. It begins like we did the receiving, and we had holded them inside the hangar, as you have seen. And once the hangar opened, so on slow time with the coffins, taking the remains into the hearses. However, in that process, when they are marching on the red carpet, the members in uniform do salute, paying homage, and the National Ceremonial Guard present arms.
And this, of course, a pivotal moment in the sense that the families will finally now get closure in terms of receiving the remains of their loved ones, and of course having the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces also here to be part of the process signifies a very important moment and the respect that there is for the mission that these men had carried out.
It gives it a very huge value, seeing the Commander-in-Chief here. You will remember that the Commander-in-Chief is the supreme in the Defense Force, of which this kind of a ceremony, we could not have done it without him. And it is the reason why we have postponed the time from morning up till this time when he is available.
Right. And if you're just watching these visuals on your screen now, these are the second batch of hearses that will carry the second batch of the remains of these fallen soldiers. What we had was that the first had been, I think they said it had been 5, and this will also be 5, and then it will be 4. I'm correct there.
Crescenda, you correctly said so. When we formed them up in the hangar number 4, we indicated that the best way is to form them up in threes, forming up in threes in batches of 5. That was made for the reason that we could march them out in the correct manner, as we should, as a defense force.